Namaste, welcome to this edition of Indic Chat presented by Indica and Indic Academy Network. Indic Academy is a non-profit seeking to bring an intellectual, cultural, and spiritual renaissance based on Indic civilizational thought. It enables public intellectuals to discover their potential, transform them as thought leaders, and nurture them to become social entrepreneurs. Indic Academy also incubates, invests, and assists social enterprises in delivering a product, service, or an experience that is based on Indic thought. These aims are achieved through scholarships and grants, courses and programs, networks and platforms and affiliates. Indic Academy is currently incubating platforms such as Indic Today, Indic Book Club, Indic Knowledge Systems, Creative India, Advaita Academy, and Indic Festivals. You can find out more about Indic Academy through these websites: indicacademy.org, indica.network, indictoday.com, indicbookclub.com, indicapictures.com, advaita-academy.org. With the introduction to Indic Academy done, let me introduce the erudite, inspiring, and very modest Sarvesh Tiwari ji, who's kindly agreed to our request for an Indic chat on reimagining Bharat Bhasha, myths, challenges, and possibilities. Sarvesh ji is a researcher and blogger. He's interested in Indic history and civilization. He blogs and tweets under Bharatendu and is quite popular with people interested in these topics. Namaste Sarvesh ji, धनतेरस के शुभ अवसर पर भारतीय भाषाओं का स्वर्णिम व अप्रतिम संबंध जोड़ती आज के इंडिक चैट में आपका स्वागत है. वेलकम अगेन.
वर्णानाम अर्थ संघानाम रसानाम छंदसामपि मंगलानाम च कर्तारौ वंदे वाणी विनायकौ भवानी शंकरौ वंदे श्रद्धा विश्वास रूपिणौ याभ्यां विना न पश्यन्ति सिद्धाः स्वान्तः स्थमीश्वरम् वंदे बोधमयं नित्यं गुरुं शंकररूपिणं यमाश्रितो हि वक्रोऽपि चंद्रः सर्वत्र वंद्यते. Namah Sarvebhyah. Namaste Dimple ji. Thank you very much for inviting me for this chat, and thank you also to Indic Academy for facilitating it. I think the topic is very, very apropos and very relevant to the times that we are in. So thank you for facilitating it once again. And I also wish all our participants a very happy Deepavali and Dhanteyodashi.
It's our absolute delight, Sarvesh ji, to have you here in this edition of Indic Chat. आपके blog और आपके Twitter handle से तो ये सहज ही प्रतीत होता है कि आप भारतेंदु जी के व्यक्तित्व से, उनके कार्य से काफी प्रभावित रहे हैं. Would you like to share more about this, please?
जी, आपने बिल्कुल उचित अनुमान लगाया. यथार्थ है कि भारतेंदु हरिश्चंद्र जी के व्यक्तित्व और कृतित्व से मैं प्रभावित रहा. कुछ एक व्यक्तित्व ऐसे होते हैं जिनकी छाप गहरे पड़ जाती है, और कई बार ऐसा होता है कि उनकी रुचियां, आपकी रुचियां, उनके कार्य और आपकी रुचियां तारतम्य में आ जाते हैं. तो भारतेंदु जी बहुमुखी प्रतिभा के व्यक्ति थे. जिस समय उनका प्रादुर्भाव हुआ, the time that he was born in, it was a British period, and the language seen especially in the North India, the time that he was born in, was really, really disappointing. So he was a little boy when the 1857 happened. And one of the things that people noticed, and he mentions at places that he also noticed, was that while the soldiers who had mutinied were from two places, there were eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar soldiers, and at the same time fighting alongside them as their comrades in arms were also soldiers from Andhra Pradesh. And it was so sad and surprising that they could not understand each other's language easily while they were fighting for the same cause. This really impressed Bharatendu Harishchandra ji deeply. And at that time, he and his family used to live in West Bengal. And eventually they moved to Kashi, and he made it his life mission to revive a lingua franca, which can be used by all Indians as a means of communication. He had studied Marathi, Bengali, Prakrit, Apabhramsh, Sanskrit, and he also had decent knowledge in Urdu and Farsi, and he did a lot of translations. He actually started revival of this language we now call Hindi through translations of Bengali natakas and novels. And then he went on to learn English, and he translated several of English classics into Hindi language as well. He even translated multiple Sanskrit and Prakrit works as well. He was very wealthy, so he invested all his wealth into this cause. He established newspapers, printing presses, he established scholarships. He promoted a language which would be very close to Sanskrit, which would be inspired by Sanskrit, which will take the vocabulary of Sanskrit, and which would also be at the same time as easy for a common person to easily learn and understand. And it's due to Bharatendu ji that we are able to speak this language, which we call Hindi. Otherwise, promoted by British and other interests, it would have been Urdu, which especially in the North India would have occupied the linguistic space. So Dimple ji, you are right. I do have a lot of respect for Bharatendu ji, and that's why when I saw this domain was available, bharatendu.com, I picked that up.
सर्वेश जी, एक्चुअली इस इंडिक चैट की परिकल्पना मैंने काफी समय से की हुई है, और अभी कुछ not really in the distant past, there have been some instances जिनसे कि लगा कि ऐसे वार्तालाप की, ऐसे संवाद की आवश्यकता बढ़ गई है हमारे समाज में, हमारे देश में. जैसे in we had the agitation by when was used for metro signages, which was kind of strange options. Also, online, if you even you see call verbal violence against Hindi. कुछ लोग बोलते हैं कि हिंदी शब्द ही फॉलो उसके कोई respect देना, और then I kind of think that we have had this linguistic diversity for centuries. So how did the Hindu civilization conduct its life in the past, and was Sanskrit the lingua franca? Can you tell us something about it?
Avashya, Dimple ji. So first of all, let's look at the linguistic diversity of India, which is truly amazing. So as per the linguistic survey or the census that happened in 2011 and the reports published, according to that report, people said that there are about 19,200, a little more than that,
wow.
that many languages in India. So the methodology of that survey, when I was reading about it, was very simple. They would not give any option. They would say, what is your language? And person has to respond with one language. And they would just take that answer without having to, doing any analysis upfront. So the answer that they received from every individual or every family, that count is to 19,000. So,
wow.
So I think that would perhaps be the most diverse, linguistically diverse civilization that we are. Now, one problem with that survey, I think I should immediately mention, is it asks for one language. It says, what is your mother language? It does not say what are the different languages you know, because unlike monolithic linguistic cultures in Europe and in the West generally, every Indian perhaps knows 3 or more languages. So in North India, again, that's a common misconception among a lot of people that North Indians speak Hindi. Now, my mother tongue is not Hindi. My mother tongue is Awadhi. I speak Awadhi at home with my parents or siblings or with my family. I don't remember. I don't think I ever spoke Hindi with my parents because it will look very awkward. Just to share, my grandmother, we are from Uttar Pradesh, eastern Uttar Pradesh, near Ayodhya. She could not speak Hindi. She, I mean, it would seem surprising to many people. They say Hindi belt, etc. But there are a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, who can understand Hindi but not speak Hindi. So
Hmm.
I'm just going a little bit into that, belaboring my point that multilingual society is a reality in India, and our
Ji.
census or linguistic survey does not do justice to that multilingual nature of India, and especially North India. So Uttar Pradesh alone,
Ji.
for example, has more than 10 well-established languages. So
Hmm.
somebody, for example, who speaks Bagheli will
Hanji.
not be communicate in that language with somebody from, let's say, northeastern part of Uttar Pradesh, let's say Gorakhpur or nearabouts, where Bhojpuri is
Ji.
spoken. Somebody
Ji.
likewise in Uttarakhand or Uttar Pradesh Uttarakhand border that speaks Garhwali will not be able to communicate in Braj Bhasha. So
Ji.
these are not just bolis or vibhashas, these are actual bhashas. So there is a communication, lingua franca, you can say, which has come down to be Hindi, but this linguistic diversity is not captured truly by the linguistic survey. Now, this is true of entire India. I was just
Ji.
taking an example out of Uttar Pradesh, but it's true of all India. Now, when we have so much of diversity, uh, you know, which is since ages, naturally, there would have been some working system that Hindu civilization or the Indian civilization must have found to be working for itself. So I hope that in next few minutes, we would be able to get a little bit into all of that. But coming back to the point you made, Dimpleji, that so much of tussle is going on, tension exists on basis of linguistic identity. So it's, I think, pretty natural for everyone to have pride and affection for one's mother tongue. In fact, I would say it would be abnormal if somebody said that I don't have pride, I don't have affection for the mother tongue, the tongue which we grew up listening right from the cradle. In fact, before we were born, perhaps, right? So
Yes.
so I'm reminded of line which Maithili Sharan Gupta ji had said that जिसे
Ji.
न निज भाषा न निज देश पर अभिमान है वह नर नहीं नर पशु निरा समझो मृतक समान है. So he goes to
Bilkul.
that extent. He says if you don't love your mother tongue, you consider yourself as good as nar
Dead.
pashu, he says, or dead. So it's pretty natural. But I also have to say at the same token that as far as I can see, as far as I have noticed, this kind of language-based tussle was not a feature of Indian society. And we did celebrate this linguistic diversity. We did have a working model of how it all works. So
Wow.
I'll quickly move to the other point you made that people say that Hindi is new language. Maybe Hindi name itself is foreign, and what is the reality of that? So, Dimpleji, it is true that this word Hindi, just like the word Hindu, is of foreign origin.
Ji.
So Arabs actually started calling India Hind, which was itself they had taken from Persian Hindu. And the first attestation of this word Hindi for the language actually comes from a Persian work of about 5th century, 5th to early 6th century. It's it's from a Persian translation of Panchatantra. So the then Shah of Iran, called Noshirwan, he had ordered a translation of Panchatantra, which
Mm-hmm.
in the preface of that, the author, the translator, says that he's translating it from Zuban-e Hindi. Now,
Oh, acha, acha. Wow.
So in 5th century, you have the first usage of this word Hindi for for a language. But you might be curious, obviously, the language being referred to here is not what we call Hindi, it is
Yes.
Sanskrit. Yes.
Hmm.
So,
Ji.
the Arabs and Persians, especially Persians, they called Sanskrit as Hindi. Okay.
Ji. Uh-huh.
And you find this not only here, at multiple places. There was another translation, parts which is parts of Mahabharata, again before the Islam was born. It was translated in the Pahlavi language, Eastern Iranian dialect of Farsi.
Ji.
There also, the word Hindi is used to refer to Samskrita Bhasha, and so there are several examples that they use this language, uh, Hindi. Another example, still in abroad, is a biographer of Temur Lang. His name was Sarfaruddin Yazdi. So he wrote
Okay.
a Persian Arabic book called Zafarnama. There
Hmm.
he uses the word Hindi, saying that he mentions certain words such as Rao for a king, and he says this word has come from Hindi language.
Hmm.
So this is in like 14th, early 15th century, Zafarnama. Now I have very interesting another reference to this language Hindi. This is from Al-Biruni. So Al-Biruni, we all know, was with Muhammad Ghaznavi, and he had spent 13 years in India learning about different subjects, different sciences. And right in the beginning of his book, Al-Biruni says, he talks about the language, and he says this language that Indians use, Hindus use,
Hmm.
is Hindi. And and the interesting thing is, and I would like to read just one couple of sentences. So
Zarur.
this is Al-Biruni's book translated from Arabic by Dr. Qayamuddin Ahmad of Aligarh
Uh-huh.
University. So I read. He says, this language Hindi is divided into a neglected vernacular one, only in use among the common people, and a classical one only in use among the upper and educated classes, which
Uh-huh.
is which is much cultivated and subject to the rules of grammatical inflections and etymology, and
Mm-hmm.
to all the niceties of grammar and rhetoric. So this is in early 11th century, Al-Biruni, who is
Ji.
saying that Hindi is a language which has two registers. There
Yes.
is one register used by common people and another elevated register which is used by elites
Elite.
and educated class.
Yes.
I'm going to repeat that so that it's very clear.
Hmm.
Al-Biruni spent 13 years in India, from Kashmir to Madhya Desh to Karnataka to Gujarat, he to Sindh. He traveled a lot of places, and he was aware of several other languages. He in fact further mentions many languages and scripts. He mentions Kannada by name. He mentions Dravid Bhasha, Tamil he calls Dravid. He
Uh-huh.
mentions Andhra Bhasha. He
Uh-huh.
mentions so many languages. He mentions scripts by name, so he describes each script. So it's not that he was not aware. That he just called general language as Hindi. So he's making an observation that Hindi is a language which, on one hand, is very elevated, which is basically Sanskrit, used by elites with tightly bound in a grammar and very specific word selection through etymology, etc. And then there is a poor register of the same language, Hindi, which is used by ordinary common people. So let that point be remembered, that Hindi and Sanskrit, he calls the same language Hindi. Now, even before Al-Biruni, there are other travelers, other Arab and Persians who had visited India and who mentioned languages such as Gujarati. So I also want you to pay attention to this appellation or this title of Hindi. Why do they call this language Hindi? They call this language Hindi because it was widespread. It was understood. It was lingua franca of India, greater India at least. And not that they are not aware of other languages. They call Gujarati, like I said, they mentioned other languages as well. Now, I'll move forward. What did we ourselves call Hindus or natives of India? We didn't use this word Hindi until about 1800. You'd be surprised. Until about year 1800 or slightly before that, we did not use this word Hindi for this language. We called so we called this bhasha that we are speaking bhasha. We simply called it bhasha. We either called it bhasha, and let me give some examples. So Tulsi Das ji, in the preface of Ramcharitmanas, he writes a Sanskrit chanda, and it ends with bhasha nibaddha mati manjula matanoti. So he says that I'm doing this nibandh, this work in bhasha. Very interesting. His near contemporary, junior contemporary, Keshav Das, very important poet of Braj Bhasha, he says, "Bhasha bol na janahi jinke kul ke das, tin bhasha kavita kari jadmati Keshav Das." So please understand, he is referring to both Sanskrit and Bhasha. He says that in my family, jinke kulke das, even servants of my family don't use Bhasha. They speak in Sanskrit. They don't use Bhasha. But then I am unfortunate. I am jada buddhi. I don't have, that I am having to write poetry in Bhasha. He is referring to Braj Bhasha. Then, I'm only using examples where both Sanskrit and this Bhasha we call Hindi is coming together. Okay. Tulsi, for example, again at another place in the preface of Manasa, there is a very emotional line. He says, "Bhasha bhanit bhori mati thori, hasahi yogya, hasahi na khori." Please understand. He says that I write poetry in Bhasha. I'm not writing in Sanskrit because my mind is small. Bhori mati mori. My mind is small, so I'm not writing poetry in Sanskrit. Hasahi yogya. It is laughter worthy. My effort, because I'm not writing in Sanskrit, I'm writing in Bhasha. It's laughter worthy, and please laugh. There is no harm in laughing, he says. So, I just wanted to mention that understand the sentiment. They are referring to Sanskrit and Bhasha in a relationship to each other. Kabir, several centuries before Tulsi Das, says, "Sanskrit kavita koop jal, bhasha bahta neer." So, so he says, Sanskrit kavita is deep, but at the same time you need effort to cultivate it. Koop jal, it's deep. Kuएं का पानी. It is deep, but you need to put an effort to understand it, to learn Sanskrit kavita. But bhasha bahta neer. Bhasha means language that I am speaking in and writing in. It is like a river. You can just go there and take the water and quench your thirst. Again, he's trying to compare and contrast. Again, but the larger point was that yes, this word Hindi is of foreign origin. We ourselves didn't use this word until late 1700s, perhaps. Indian Muslims, though, lot of Indian Muslims continue to use this word Hindi to refer to Indian language. Okay, that is also true. So, for example, Amir Khusro in 13th century, writing in Persian, he says, "Turk Hindustaniyam man Hinduvi goyam jawab." So he says, "I'm an Indian Muslim. I'm Turk, Hindustani Turk, and I speak Hinduvi bhasha." Okay. Now, there are several examples that we can give that they continue to use this word Hindi, and that perhaps causes confusion that we mix later when it comes to Urdu, that maybe we can talk about. we
Oh.
kind of get confused what is Urdu and what is Hindi.
So this was quite interesting, actually. So are you suggesting that it was an Apabhransh or the current version of what we currently call Hindi? This in it was the lingua franca of a larger section of Indian society, and Sanskrit was also there. So can we conclude that? क्या हम ये निष्कर्ष निकाल सकते हैं?
जी, थोड़ा समय इसमें देना होगा इस विषय पर, थोड़ा सा और,
जरूर,
क्योंकि
समय
अब
ही
हमें
समय है, आप समय लीजिए।
एक बहुत सुंदर पंक्ति, एक छंद महाकवि कालिदास जी का आता है कुमार संभव में। वे कहते हैं, द्विधा प्रयुक्तेन च वाङ्मयेन सरस्वती तन्मिथुनं नुनाव संस्कारपूतेन वरं वरेण्यं वधूं सुखग्राह्य निबंधनेन। It's very beautiful chand. Okay, so the context is that, as you know, Kumar Sambhava is a great poetry all about how the Kumar was born.
जी.
So this is from the Saptame Sarga, so this is from 7th Sarga, and the context is that Shiva and Parvati, they have been married now, and now they are seated together with kind of reception, okay,
Okay.
and divine reception. And
जी.
all the gods and goddesses, all the Devata Gana, they appear and they congratulate the couple. and
Okay.
so his Kalidas Mahodaya is describing how Saraswati congratulated Shiva and Parvati. So he says, Dvidha prayuktena cha vangmayena. He says that this vangmaya, this body of speech, Saraswati uses two modes of that speech, Dvidha. Okay, so she praises Nunava, she praises the Mithuna, the couple, in a body of speech which had two modes. Okay, what are those two modes that Kalidas says in the next two lines? He says, Samskar putena varam varenyam. So when she is addressing the groom, Saraswati is using Samskar Put Bhasha. Okay, you can easily guess that is Sanskrit.
Yes.
And then Saraswati Devi addresses Parvati Devi, and in what language? What type of language rather? Vadhum Sukhagrahya Nibandhane. Sukhagrahya. It is easily understood language.
Oh,
So,
understood.
so you asked that whether it's exactly. So lingua franca, I mean, this is divine lingua franca even. Saraswati is speaking to gods. So Deva Bhasha is not just Sanskrit alone. And it is Sanskrit definitely, but at the same time, assisting Sanskrit is another language which is Sukhgrahya. And you can give any name you like. Apabhransh, like you mentioned, Apabhransh can be one name, broken. We can get into a little bit detail about that. But I want to once again highlight what Al-Biruni said and what much earlier and much more eloquently Mahakavi Kalidas says. It is one Vangmaya, which has two modes. One is Samskaraput and another is Sukhagrahya. Okay, so the problem comes when we straitjacket that Vangmaya into saying this is Deva Bhasha and this is corrupted. Okay, Kalidas didn't do that. In fact, Mahakavi Kalidas, since we are talking about him, he is very close to half of his body of literature is not in Sanskrit Bhasha, not in the Bhasha of Panini's grammar. Half of his, about 40% or 45% is in Prakrita Bhasha, and multiple Prakrita Bhashas, mostly in Apabhransh and even Apabhransh Bhasha. So in Vikramor Vashiyam, he actually composes poetry in Apabhransh. Apabhransh is basically where Hindi and several other modern languages arose from. So whenever I hear people say that Kalidas is great Sanskrit poet, that he definitely is. But do not forget, he's not just a Sanskrit poet. Kalidas is Arya Bhasha poet. He represents all our collective spectrum of Arya Bhasha, right from Sanskrit to this Sukhgrahya Bhasha, which we call Hindi today. Okay. Now, we डिम्पल जी थोड़ा 10 मिनट और थोड़ा इसमें हमें
समय में आप लीजिए
क्योंकि आपने प्रश्न पूछा बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण प्रश्न है और थोड़ा सा हमें इतिहास में जाना होगा
जी।
तो लगभग चौथी पांचवी शताब्दी फोर्थ और फिफ्थ सेंचुरी perhaps the oldest inscription which uses the word Sanskrit. Okay, I believe I can perhaps I don't I think that is the oldest inscription which mentions Sanskrit as a language is in Saurashtra in Vallabhi. Okay, so this inscription talks about a king and says that that king was Nipuna in doing poetry in 3 languages, or actually it doesn't say languages, it just says Sanskrit Prakrita Apabhransham. So he conducted poetry in Sanskrit, Prakrit and Apabhransh. So I mention this because Sanskrit for the first time appeared in this inscription, and immediately following Sanskrit is Prakrit and Apabhransh. So we should pause and understand a little bit more about this Trividha Bhasha, why this Arya Bhasha, and this is a pattern which I can give you perhaps dozens of examples, right from great Sanskrit grammarians like Mahamuni Patanjali himself, who right from the in his Mahabhashya, actually the first statement he makes is about Apabhransha. It's very, people don't pay attention to it. He says ekasyaiva shabdasya bahava apabhranshah. That's how he starts.
Wow.
He says that for every single word there are multiple apabhranshas. Now obviously I admit he's not talking about a language called Apabhransha, but he's defining actually the behavior. But then he doesn't use the word Sanskrit either for describing the language we know as Sanskrit, right? I can give multiple examples, but I'll perhaps use the great scholar king, the Pramar Rajan Bhojadeva. So in his great work Shringar Prakash, he actually describes this in great detail. People get agitated when it is pointed out that Sanskrit itself is not one language, but perhaps a closely knit related more than one languages. Bhojadeva says the same. He actually says that Vakya or the Vach, the speech, is again 3 types. He says Sanskrita, Prakrita, Apabhransha. Again, as I said, dozens of writers who say the same thing. But then immediately he, unlike others, goes into detail of Sanskrit. He says that Sanskrit is also of 3 types. He says Shrautam, Arsh, and Laukikam. He says the Sanskrit we speak, Laukika, is not the same as Shraut Sanskrit. Shruti, the Sanskrit of Shruti is different. And then he further says that Shrautam Dvidha, that even the Vedic Sanskrit is also of 2 types. He says Mantra Brahmanam Bhedat. So he says that Mantra, which is actually the Sangita portion of Veda, that has a different type of Sanskrit. And Brahmana, which is the second half of the second part of Veda Vangmaya, that uses a different type of Sanskrit. He doesn't stop there. He in fact gives example. So he quotes Richa to say that this is mantra Sanskrit or the Chandas. And then immediately after that, he quotes from a Brahmana from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and he says this is Brahmana Sanskrit.
Wow.
And and then so then he says that Arsha, so which is that the language which rishis themselves used was a different Sanskrit. So he goes into that detail. He says there what you read in the Smritis, and he quotes one verse from Manu Smriti. He says this Sanskrita is Arsha Sanskrit, and then he quotes from Vayu Purana immediately after that. He says this Sanskrita is Purana Sanskrita. So Purana. So again, it's a very lengthy discussion, and then he continues, and then he goes into Prakrita. It's a continuum. Immediately after that, he goes into Prakritam, and Prakrita again he describes multiple categories of Prakrita.
Yes.
Within that, he says Samskrita Samaprakritam is the first type of Prakrita.
Ah.
I think, I'm guessing here, I think he is referring to a language very similar to Pali. Okay. Now we pay lip service when we often hear this conversation, Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit. We perhaps just do lip service and move forward. But I don't want to do that. I think for Manoranjan, perhaps I'll read one line, maybe a couple of lines from Pali, so that you can understand how close really it is to Vedic Bhasha or Sanskrit. Okay. So I read from Dhammapadam. It is Dhammatthavaggo. Now listen to this bhasha. Naten hoti dhammatto yenatham sahasa naye yo cha atham anathancha ubho nicheya pandito asahasena dhammena samena nayati pare dhammasya gutto medhavi dhammatthoti pavuchyati. Now this is perhaps what Bhojadeva calls as Samskrita Samaprakrita, or a type of Prakrita, oldest Prakrita, which was pretty close to
Sanskrit.
Yeah, Sanskrit, yes. Now, Prakrit grammarians themselves, by the way, I want to again, and I address the Sanskrit Panditas, enthusiasts. Within Prakrita grammar, and not just the Nastikas, even very Astika Prakrita grammarians, they have memory of saying this term called Arsha Prakritam. They say that there is a Prakrit which is Arsha. They think that rishis who saw the mantras, they themselves, did they use that language? They perhaps used the language that they are using is actually Prakrita language. So unlike this more commonplace thought process that Sanskrit is mother of all languages, the Prakrit grammarians think that Sanskrit is a more respected contemporary language, but not the mother of Prakrit. Although there are a lot of Prakrit grammarians who also think that Sanskrit is mother, but they think it's more of aunt than mother. Okay, more of a more respected aunt. Okay.
Understood.
Now I'll move forward quickly. Okay, in Kashmir, Kashmir Desha, Acharya Abhinavagupta, he says, Bhasha Sanskritapabhransha, Bhashapabhranshastu Vibhasha. What he means is that Bhasha, so we have seen Tulasidas, Kabir, all of them, they happened not too much after Abhinavagupta, right? Maybe 2 centuries later, Kabir happened. They use the word Bhasha. Abhinavagupta says Bhasha comes from Sanskrit. When the Sanskrit gets broken, Apabhransh really means broken, corrupted, fallen off, language which breaks the grammar, right? Colloquial. So Bhasha, Abhinavagupta says, is coming from Sanskrit, and Vibhasha. So please understand, because nowadays we are confused. There is Braj Bhasha, there is Maithili, they are different, etc. Abhinavagupta denies that. He says Bhasha Samskita Apabhranshah. So Bhasha is Apabhransh of Sanskrit, and Bhasha Apabhranshastu Vibhasha, which means these bolis, Vibhashas, are broken or fallen off version of this Bhasha. And please understand, bhasha itself at a abstract level means bhashyate iti bhasha. What we speak is bhasha. So
Yes.
they don't use this word very often for Sanskrit. They reserve Sanskrit for Deva bhasha. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that Sanskrit was not spoken. It of course was spoken. It was Lok bhasha as well. That's why we have Laukik Sanskrita. But the Laukik Sanskrita, okay, ended up being very clished for the Samanya Jan, for ordinary person to be able to speak with accuracy. Okay, so in the Natya Shastra, Bharat Muni describes the situation. He says that multiple languages should be used. So he in fact describes 7 bhashas. So Samskrita is one of them, and there are multiple prakritas. And then he describes 7 vibhashas as well.
Uh-huh.
And it should be very clearly understood that within vibhashas he has not kept Dravida bhashas out. He does mention Andhri, he does mention Dravid itself. Okay, so he mentions them, and he says that Natya must use them. So so this kind of language-based conflict that we see is perhaps very confusing to me. Okay, because you see this kind of cultural continuum. Okay, but then very briefly, I'll just conclude. Um I mentioned the inscription of 4th, 5th century, which mentions Sanskrit right immediately after that, Prakrita and Apabhransh. Similarly, Bhamaha in Kavya Lankar, he also follows the same. He mentions all the 3, Apabhransh immediately as an essential part of Arya Bhasha. Then we have Dandin in his Kavya Darsha. And Dandi, by the way, is an interesting scholar, poet, and philosopher. He was a North Indian who migrated to Deep South. He, according to Kimvadanti, lived perhaps in Tamil Nadu. And he follows the same. And he, in fact, he says that apart from Sanskrit Prakrit Apabhramsha, there is a more common usage which is mixed. So you say half sentence or one sentence in Samskrita Bhasha, another in the Prakrita Bhasha, or in the Dravida Bhasha, perhaps.
Okay.
Okay?
I
So this
see. I
mixture.
see.
Further
So,
later in the
no. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was just going to conclude. Perhaps you asked a very simple question, but I made it very long-winded. But it's very important for us to understand that you asked the question: how did our civilization, with all this
Conduct its life.
linguistic, exactly with this diversity? So I can only say what Raj Shekhar said. So Raj Shekhar was a poet in 11th, 12th century in the Chandel times in upper Madhya Pradesh. Okay, so he says a very, very important thing. He says, Shabdarthau te shariram samskritam mukham prakritam bahu jaghanam brahmsha paishacham padau uro mishram. So he creates an imagery. The imagery is of language as a body, of a human body. And he says that the sharir, essential body, is basically shabd and arth, shabdartho. So shabdartho te shariram. उनके जो शरीर हैं वो शब्द और अर्थ से बने हैं. संस्कृतम मुखम. So the Sanskrit bhasha is the most important. It's the head, it's the face. Okay, but then bahu is prakritam. Prakritam bahu. So the heavy lifting is done by Prakrit bhasha to conduct our civilizational business. And then jaghanam apabhransha. The bottom part is apabhransha. So the center of gravity to this civilizational existence is provided by apabhransha. Don't forget that.
Wow.
And then paishacham pado. The feet are paishach. Now we will skip the Vyakhya of paishach. Pishach, language of pishachas. Okay, now there are multiple people have said multiple things about it. Some think Paishachi Bhasha was language spoken on the northwest. Some think it is tribal language of Andhra Pradesh or Proto-Telugu perhaps. Some say Paishachi actually is a Dardic language. It is a mixture of Persian and Dardic.
Understood.
So we will skip that discussion, but he says Paishacham Pado,
Uh-huh.
and ultimately Uro Mishram. At heart of this bhasha is a
It's a
mixture of these.
yeah.
That's how. So so if we take one out, if we say Sanskritam alone is our lingua franca, or we say Hindi alone is lingua franca, or we say any one of these alone, then we would be kind of killing that bhasha purusha, right? That Rajashekhara created. Okay,
Indeed.
so I would conclude there. I would maybe again just say that looking at this great working model for over 2 millennia that our ancestors created, nurtured, nourished, all these linguistic wars that that are going on, I can only say that famous subhashitam यथा खरश्चंदन भारवाही भारस्य वेत्ता न तु चंदनस्य, that like a donkey is carrying a load of sandalwood, and that donkey however doesn't know the fragrance of that sandalwood. He only
Indeed.
knows how much load he is carrying. That's how we have become. I'm talking in English, we are interacting in English. We think English is the language of improvement, and that's where we are. I apologize. I think I took up a lot of time.
No, please. We appreciate you actually taking out time to give such an in-depth answer. For the benefit of the audience members, I would like to emphasize, and I think I should have said it in the beginning, that Sarvesh Tiwari ji has lived across India, and Sarvesh ji speaks a lot of languages. Before I move on to the next question, my question immediately is, how many languages and which all languages do you speak, Sarvesh ji?
I, I won't claim to speak many languages, but fortunately, life gave me opportunity to live like a parivrajak all over Bharatvarsh. So I spent a lot of my years in younger days in South India. I actually studied and lived in Tamil Nadu for a while, for several years.
Wow.
Moved to Andhra Pradesh. I lived in Maharashtra. I lived in Bengal. I lived in Rajasthan, Haryana, and my mother tongue is Awadhi. I I lived. I think I have traveled to, perhaps, except for a few states in Northeast, I have been to all these states. I can, because I lived in Tamil Nadu for a few years when I was young, and it is easy to pick up languages when you are young. I can read and write Tamil. I can understand it pretty well. I'm not fluent anymore. I can maybe if I spend a couple of days and then after that I becomes fluent. Telugu is more easy for me. I lived longer in Andhra Pradesh, as well as a lot of my friends, even in Tamil Nadu, were Telugu. So I picked up Telugu. I cannot unfortunately read and write, but I can speak. So that's more important to speak, right?
Yes.
I did that. I have fairly good practice of Bengali as well. So especially movies, I really enjoy Bengali movies. So of all the Indian movies, Bengali movies I think are the best. So I can have a conversation in Bengali. I can actually read and write Bengali as well.
Oh, wonderful.
And naturally, Hindi is our lingua franca. It is my language as well, just like anybody else's. But once again, maybe I'm repeating. I mean, Hindi is not my first language, maybe not even my second language. Okay, it's my third language. But I understand the importance of Hindi, and I hope everybody else understands the importance of what we call Hindi, or what our ancestors called Apabhramsha. It's very important. So Dimple, again a long answer.
No, but this answer was required so that people get a clue about why is it that we invited you and why did we want you to converse with us on this important topic. In fact, let me tell the participants here that if you go to Sarvesh ji's Twitter timeline, you will see how beautifully he translates chandas, Tamil poetry into Hindi or Sanskrit even. I mean, I have actually reached out to him on behalf of Center for Indic Writers to look at something of that sort, like him translating those verses from Tamil to any language, other language that he's comfortable in, Hindi, Sanskrit, whatever. Oh, well, that was a digression, but an interesting one for the audience. The question now that I'm going to ask you is about the fact that जो आपने अभी तक कहा उसको देख के हम ये सब सुन रहे हैं. I would request everybody to keep their microphone on mute. So the question, Sarvesh ji, is that there are some people who talk about how in 1947 there was a lost opportunity, and there was Sanskrit which could have been taken up, and the UP walas opposed Sanskrit, which was propped up by Ambedkar ji, and South Indians and even some Muslims said that it should be there. And some people have this thing that Hindi is promoted at the cost of Sanskrit. In fact, you would have heard this Hindi imposition. Our brethren from the South talk about it. Recently, I was in a discussion with some friends, and because this Hindi imposition in the South is being called out, is being questioned, because if just a signage in Hindi as an option is not Hindi imposition, it is just an alternative. So now I recently was a little surprised that somebody said हिंदी ने खड़ी बोली ब्रिज भाषा अवधि उनके कॉस्ट पे हिंदी बढ़ी है. So these are a little disappointing sentiments for me. As you rightly said, regional pride should be there. अपनी माँ सबको प्रिय है, पर मौसी से इतना द्वेष रखना, और and those very people are very okay with English. So द्वेष है अपनी मौसी के प्रति, पर दास्ता है फिरंगी आंटी के प्रति. I'm just giving a very common analogy. So I was wondering, what is the truth about the fact that we could have had Sanskrit, but this was an opportunity because of the UP walas, but it was lost. So please tell us about it.
जी, आपने डिम्पल जी बहुत सुंदर बातें कही. आपके प्रश्न में दो तीन भिन्न भिन्न प्रश्न हैं, एक एक करके उनको लेते हैं. I'm sorry, I jumped into Hindi again. So
please use Hindi and English both, whatever is comfortable. We're keeping it bilingual, so that anybody and everybody can understand.
Yes. So, so first of all, the short answer to the question that in 1947 we missed the opportunity of elevating Deva Bhasha once again to the naturally the most deserving Bhasha for being our national lingua franca must be Sanskrit. So referring back to Rajashekhara's imagery, how can without face, how can you have that lingua franca, right? So that part is I agree with that. It should be Sanskrit, but I think that's more of knee-jerk reaction opposing Hindi. Okay. Hindi and Sanskrit together, okay, two spectrums, like Kalidas had said, Samskar Put on one end of the spectrum and Sukhagrahya on the other. Together, perhaps is the solution, but that was the short answer. I think we should once again understand that long before 1947 happened, long before Constitutional Assembly was constituted and all of that happened, language, the national language, the national lingua franca, it was decided. It's not some 100 people sitting in the parliament decide. It was decided by people, several generations, over 1,000 or maybe more than 1,000 years. Okay, what that lingua franca looks like was already. So I think we should understand that civilizational momentum. I call it civilizational momentum. If we miss understanding and analyzing that momentum, we really make wrong decisions for ourselves. And that's a problem, not just in the question of language, but even in geopolitics, even so many other things that are wrong in our society is because we fail to grasp and understand our civilizational momentum. Yes. But Dimple ji, I think since in last question I bored our audience to sleep, perhaps.
No.
I will make this one interactive. Okay, I will keep this interactive, and I'll illustrate my point of what I mean by this civilizational momentum long before 1947 by using examples. Okay, examples of speech from all parts of India and from across multiple centuries.
Mhm.
Okay, so let me start with a few lines, and I will read them, and you let's see what you feel about them. Okay, what you think is this language. So the first that I quote is from Central India, actually written in South India by Bhojdeva's uncle, Munjdeva the Pramar king.
Oh.
So yeah, there
Mhm.
is a backstory to it. Okay, there is a
Uh-huh.
backstory that in a war with the Eastern Chalukyas, or I think Western Chalukyas, Munjdeva, who was the predecessor of Bhojadeva, his uncle, he lost the war and he was uh, captured and he was taken as a prisoner to Telangana, some place in Telangana, and he was kept as a prisoner. And the king, Chalukya king, was Tailap, and Tailap the second, and his sister Mridalini and Bhoja's uncle Munj, they fell in love.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of poetry that Munj composed while in prison, which is recorded by Bhoja and his chroniclers. Okay,
Mhm.
so all of these poetry that Munj wrote is addressed to Mridalini. Okay, so that's the backstory. In fact, I hope somebody makes a movie, because this whole it's no less interesting a movie plot than Bahubali. It in fact
Oh.
ends with Bhoja, who was then 18 years old, leading leading a small band of 6 or 7 commandos, going all the way from Madhya Pradesh, Dhar, where his capital was, Dharavati, going to South India in the capital city of Tailapa, and freeing his uncle and bringing him back successfully. And the tragedy, comedy, whatever you call it, happens when Mrinalini prefers his patriotism over his love, and
Oh.
she doesn't participate in this conspiracy of freeing up her own lover. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
so listen to this line, and I'm reading now. जा मति पच्छई संपजई सा मति पहली होय मुंज भणई मुडाल वई बिघन न बेधई कोई. So it will perhaps sound rustic, but can you connect with this language, Dimple ji? He is trying to say that ja mati pachhai
It
sampajai.
can be any of the North Indian.
Ji, ji. So you are right. Bighna na bedhai koi. So it does sound like more like Braj Bhasha, etc.
Ji,
Yes.
ji.
So he also says, "Eu jammu naguham giu." Giu means gayau. Later we say, right, or gaya
Uh-huh.
in Hindi. Gayu,
Uh-huh.
he says.
Uh-huh.
Bhattasiri khaggu na bhaggu. Again, it's little Prakrit chaya is there in this line.
Ji.
Tikha turiya maadiya gori gali na laggu. So the sentiment is very much like Bhartrihari's Niti Shataka. He says
Mhm.
that this this Janma is also gone. Bhattasiri khaggu na bhaggu. Khadg, uh, Bhattasiri means on the enemy's soldiers' heads didn't break with your khadg, nor
Yeah.
did Gori Gali na laggu, nor did
Mm.
you have romance with Sundari. Right?
Yeah.
So this is Central India, poetry written in South India in 10th, 11th century. Okay,
Wow.
I'll move forward to East India. Okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
and actually 7th century there is good collection, very good collection of Apabhransha poetry uh, from Siddha Parampara.
Mhm.
So the
Uh-huh.
84 Siddhas of Sahaja school, they are somewhere in the spectrum of Nastika, Astika. You can't put them as hardcore Buddhists.
Hmm.
They are not Nastikas, but yes, within that spectrum, these 84 Siddhas of North India, uh, they composed their poetry in this language. So please consider this. Okay. ही मन पवन न संचरय रवि ससी नाहि पवेश तही बढ़ चित्त बिसाम करु सरहे कहिय उवेश.
This is in Bengal. This was composed in Bengal.
This was composed actually by a person who is from Assam, Sarahapad.
Oh,
He was
wow.
from Assam, but he was a
Uh-huh.
lecturer
Mhm.
in the Nalanda University, and then
Yes.
he left his job, and
Mhm.
he was seeking what he called Sahaj Sukha, or the enlightenment, and he roamed all over India, and he finally found what he was looking for in Maharashtra. So he's all India Parivrajaka basically. So,
He's one of
but
he's one of your earlier reincarnations.
so he so this is 7th century, and to me it sounds like old Hindi, or I mean, again, sure, it is
Yes.
it is, I mean, you can understand it's a 1400-year-old language. And
Yeah.
if somebody, for example, compares Sangamira Tamil to contemporary Tamil, you can understand the gap in the language, right? It's like that.
Yes.
But that doesn't
Yes.
mean that Hindi is a new language or it didn't exist.
Indeed.
Sarahapad perhaps is the first, I would say, closer to what we can call Hindi. Okay?
Wow.
9th century, Karnapad. Okay, he's from Bihar. Okay, Mithila Kshetra. Okay,
Uh-huh.
Karnapad, 9th
Okay.
century, in 800s. He says, very interesting thing. Listen carefully. He says, "Ek न किज्जई मंत्र न तंत्र,
Hmm.
एक न किज्जई मंत्र न तंत्र, निज घरणी लय केली करंत." निज घरणी, घरणी means गृहिणी or patni. Okay, निज घरणी लय केली करंत, निज घर घरणी जावण मज्जई, तब की पंचवर्ण विहरिजई. I will not explain. It's a Sandhya Bhasha. So these Siddhas,
Mhm.
they had this kind of language, Sandhya, double meaning language. Okay, but
Mhm.
again, another
It's
very,
very sounds very similar to sounds similar. You can make out a lot of words.
yeah,
Nij,
yeah,
tantra, mantra.
uh, exactly. So this, in fact, this unique thing which we say kijiye, lijiye, this usage in Hindi, you can see that reflection here. Ek na kijai,
Yes.
he says, mantra na tantra, don't do mantra,
Yeah.
don't do tantra. Okay,
Tantra.
ek na kijai. Okay, so this jiye, ki jiye, that chaya you can see in this language. 9th century, Karnapad.
Wow.
Then another interesting one, further 10th century. Maybe we'll skip. We'll go to Gorakhnath, my favorite. Okay. Uh,
Okay.
so again, Gorakhnath or Gorakshanath is very interesting, very interesting character. So in fact, Acharya Hajari Prasad Dwivedi ji, he says
Hmm.
that in the religious history of Hindus, after Shankaracharya ji, perhaps the most impressive personality, most effective, impactful personality whose footprints can still be seen all over
Hmm.
India, just like
Hmm.
Acharya Shankara's.
Hmm.
That personality is Gorakshanath, he says. In
Okay.
many ways, Hajari Prasad Dwivedi finds work of Goraksh to be on similar lines as in the different context that of Acharya Shankar.
Mhm.
So, so Gorakh footprint, I mean, it's as broad as Afghanistan. So you have Goraksha Pithas, there used to be at least, all the way Afghanistan. Peshawar was a very famous, popular one.
Yes. Indeed.
Peshawar, there still is some skeleton of that Goraksha Peeth. Gorakhpur, obviously, we all know, Treta Yuga center of, according to their mythology, uh, uh, is one primary center. Another in Kathiawad in Gujarat, another in Rajasthan, Mount
So,
Abu
what is
in
the
Mewar.
reference that you wanted to give of
I, I,
Gorakh?
I thank you for bringing me back. I was, yeah, I was just going to read. Thank you for bringing me back on track. So, listen to this. 9th century. बसती न शून्यम शून्यम न बसती अगम अगोचर ऐसा गगर
Hmm.
शिखर मही बालक बोले ताका नाव धरोगे कैसा
Wow.
हसीबा खेलीबा धरीबा ध्यान अहनसी कथिबा ब्रह्म ज्ञान हंसे खेले न करे मन भंग ते निश्चल सदा नाथ के संग. मरो है जोगी मरो, मरो मरण है मीठा, किस मरणी मरो जिस मरणी दीठा. Can can you see reflection of Hindi in this language, or khadi boli or
Absolutely.
whatever you
Yes.
call it?
Indeed. Indeed. Absolutely.
So this is Gorakhnath in 9th century, and he's in northwest of India. Gorakh, this language, Gorakh the followers, they have collected dozens. In fact, the total Sahitya of Gorakhnath is, as Kalidas said, in two modes of Vangmaya. One is Sanskrit, and other is this language that you heard. Okay.
So essentially, you shared with us throughout the centuries across the geography of India how there was this commonality of Apabhransha or Lokik Bhasha, but you can find out that this actually is very similar to Hindi, what we
Yeah,
understand as
exactly.
Hindi.
Exactly, and I'm trying to say that even so. Again, if you, for example, look at Nanak Dev's literature, Nanak is a Punjabi, okay,
Yeah,
and that too far Western Punjabi, right? I mean,
yeah,
Thet where Lahanda and that kind of Thet Punjabi bhasha is used. So his mother tongue is Punjabi. But
yeah.
if you study his own sayings, which are recorded carefully in the Guru Granth, his own sayings, you can see. So he says, मीत सखे केते जगमाही बिनु गुरु परमेश्वर कोई नाही. Is this not Punjabi? Why he's not using Punjabi? He's using this language.
Yes.
So I'm trying to establish that the lingua franca was already established. This was the national language. Nanak is speaking. A Punjabi is not speaking Punjabi when he's talking to broader audience. He's talking this
Yes.
language.
Indeed.
There is a very interesting conversation recorded between a Tibetan monk and a Brahmin in Swat Valley. Okay, remember, in Swat Valley, northern western part of what is today Pakistan. Okay, in 12th century. Okay, so there are two or three sentences. So for a change, it's not a poetry; it's a conversation. Short sentences between a Tibetan monk and a Brahmin. So Tibetan monk says, "Hami bhotanti zogi hua." Brahmin says, Kashmiri bhotanti aya. So I'm sure you are able to follow.
Yeah.
Tibetan says, Hami Kashmiri nahi, hamara maha chinna hua. Maha chinna means greater China.
This is almost Hindi.
Because it's not poetry, it is gadya,
yes.
Conversational. He further says, Kashmiri tibanta pari dashmasi, 10 months. Dashmasi nikla gayi. So he has been out for 10 months, etc., etc. This is recorded in Tibetan manuscript published by a European Indologist in early parts of 1900.
Wow.
This Tibetan talking to a person in Swat Valley, a Brahmin.
So the expanse you have covered is almost the entire, what we call the Indian subcontinent. So from the south to the northwest, to the north to the east, you've actually demonstrated how there was a lingua franca which was in there. And since we are running short of time, we will have to move to the next question, which is like one of the questions that has been, I have personally witnessed it. And the fact is that the inadvertent labeling of Urdu infested Hindi, which is propagated by Bollywood and television entertainment channels, which makes friends from the south of India think that Hindi is actually Urdu. So, okay, let me be candid. I have no problems with Urdu at all, but I have a huge issue and complaint with anybody and anyone corrupting Hindi with Urdu and claiming that it is Hindi and Hindustani and we should accept it because Shuddh Hindi or Klisht Hindi is very difficult, or it is very difficult for people to understand, to pronounce. And I believe that this entire fabrication of Hindi being difficult is such a sham, and we need to bust it once and for all. And we need to understand that anybody who actually understands Hindi would be able to immediately discern that it is either an offspring or a sibling of Hindi. So I would want your comments on the promotion of Urdu as some kind of a language of culture, adab, tehzeeb, because of which, there's been a lot of negative perception about Hindi per se, maybe deliberately or inadvertently. So this is something that I feel really passionate about. Your views, please.
I think this is a very important question. I think at multiple layers, multiple levels, this or answer to of this question uh, creates problems or maybe solves problems. I don't know, but but again, my methodology of looking at anything is to look at it from the lens of civilizational momentum and history. Right? Urdu, this language didn't exist until about 200 or 250 years back. Let me be very candid.
Yes.
Nobody had this language called Urdu until mid 1700s. Even the Mughals, even the Muslim rulers, there was no concept of Urdu. When they spoke Farsi, they spoke Shuddha Farsi, and when they spoke Hindi, they spoke Shuddha Hindi. Example of that is even in the recorded poetries of right from Khusro. Right. So if you'll pay attention to Khusro's poetry, you will not find any. There's no Urdu in that. Okay, it's a Shuddh Hindi. Okay. Then down to Rahim. Okay, so Rahim, who foster son of Akbar and Khan Khana, Rahim's Dohe, you will not find a single word of Arabic, Farsi, etc.
Yeah, it's Hindi. Yeah.
It's Shuddh Hindi, Tatsam, Sanskritanist Hindi.
Okay.
Down to Jayasi, Malik Muhammad Jayasi, who wrote Padmavat. Read his Padmavat. There is no Urdu. There is no mixture of loan words, right?
Correct.
So, even the Urdu poets, you'd be surprised. Okay, Urdu poets of, so-called Urdu poets of early 1700s. Okay, their language, you'd be surprised. So, for example, famous Mir. Okay, Mir. I'll read one line. It is recorded in Meer's Kalam, okay? Meer Taki Meer. Okay, he says, I'm reading. क्यों कर न चुपके चुपके यूं जान से गुजरिए कहिए व्यथा जो उससे बातों की राह निकले. Now imagine व्यथा or vitha, he says, okay? Not dard, okay? Vyatha. This Meer Taki Meer, okay? So, so uh, uh, but something happened, okay, towards the late 1700s, early 1800s. Same person Mir, later he wrote, I again read, अगरचे गोशा गुजी हूं मैं शायरों में मीर पर मेरे शोर ने रूए जमी तमाम लिया. Now I don't know the meaning of that. I maybe you do. I don't know. So so this language got created somewhere in maybe very late parts of 1700. But there are a couple of things we need to understand. This language of Urdu, we should distinguish clearly from loan words that we have in our natural bhasha, Hindi, okay? Or not just in Hindi, any Indic language, be it Bengali, Marathi, Kannada, even Tamil. Even Tamil, I was surprised. I was hearing on YouTube a discourse, Tamil discourse of a very famous Yogacharya. And he, in his discourse in Tamil Bhasha, he uses words like Mamul, for example, okay, Parwa. Now, again, please, no disrespect. I'm just saying, even in deep Tamil Bhasha, these Arabic and Farsi words you can hear, okay? In Kannada, much more, Telugu, even more.
Yes.
Marathi and Bengali, if you read the literature of 1700s, etc., there is a lot of Persian and Arabic, but there was very conscious movement of Indianizing once again the languages, and both Marathi and Bengali Mahanubhava, they purposefully cleansed their languages. So Shivaji had his own momentum that he gave to cleaning up the language, right? So again, point I was trying to make was there is loan words which are sprinkled into Bhasha, which go all the way before even Islam was born. Farsi itself is a cousin language. It's an Aryan cousin Bhasha. Pahlavi Prakrit and Sanskrit, you can relate with them. Okay.
Yes.
So even in the 11th century, etc., when India proper did not yet have any Islamic rule, the poetry of that time even, there are some
Loan words.
loan words. Okay. So for example, Chandra Bardai, who was court poet and friend of Prithviraj Chauhan. Prithviraj was the last Hindu king. There was no Islamic rule before then. But even in Prithviraj Raso, and it's a puzzle which scholars are still not able to resolve, Prithviraj Raso has a few Persian words, such as Asman, for example, or Garib. So it means it's a cultural, civilizational loan from the neighbor. Okay. Just like Pahlavi and Farsi has bunch of Sanskrit words, it's just that much. So coming back, Urdu is different. Urdu is where you load this bhasha with not loan words, but actually you say that my nishtha, my aspiration is Farsi itself. So, so a friend of my colleague of mine from Iran, this lady visited India, and she was hearing some Bollywood songs, and she was able to make out parts of it. I mean, because it's so much loaded with Farsi. She was saying it's like broken Farsi. Okay, that much Farsi is there. But coming back, I think it's good if they want to have Urdu as a culture. It's up to them. I won't go into history of what sanskar of that culture is. I mean, I don't think it benefits us for this webinar. But if they want to, it can be a niche. It can be a language of its own. It can be Vishesh Bhasha of its own. But don't claim that that is the mainstream, that is the Hindi, because if you do that, you do irreparable harm to this lingua franca that we had for multiple reasons. We first of all get disconnected with the time horizon. If we start speaking this language that is full of Arabic and Farsi loan words, you break yourself from your ancestors.
Absolutely.
And other is also you make Hindi alien to its sisters like Marathi, Bengali, and its cousin sisters like Telugu and Kannada. Telugu and Kannada are not alien languages to Hindi. Hindi is their direct first cousin.
Yes.
Okay? There are so many words in Kannada. So I actually we don't have time. I did not reach South India part of how popular study of Apabhramsha was all over South India. But suffice to say that I just like examples I give from North, people don't realize how much this language Apabhramsha was cultivated deep even in Tamil Nadu. Just an example, the famous scholar Appaya Dikshitar, he is in 1500s, 16th century. What was the need for him to write a Prakrit grammar? He did.
Wow.
He wrote a Prakrit grammar. He even wrote a work called Apabhramsha Prakarana. So he even wrote a brief Apabhramsha grammar as well, sitting in Tamil Nadu.
Wow.
You'd be surprised. There is this work called Shad Bhasha, and there are various appendices to it. But this word Shad Bhasha is very commonly used in South India, referring to collection of 6 languages. So there is a manuscript, very widespread manuscript of Shad Bhasha Chandrika. Okay, it is written by a Telugu Brahmin by name of Lakshmi Dhar. Okay, so in this work he himself, and he's on the banks of Godavari. He says he's from Chirukuri. He's a Kashyap Gotra, and he is a Somayaji, and he writes this grammar that I mentioned, Shad Bhasha Chandrika, manuscripts of which are found from as widespread as Mysore to Tanjore, from Vizag to Trivandrum. And you would be surprised, the most complete manuscript of this work of Lakshmi Dhara is actually found from a Tamil Pandit's house in Salem district of Tamil Nadu in last century. It was discovered. And then eventually, as the manuscripts are collected, there are widespread use of this. However, in 13th century, uh, and the copies of this manuscript go all the way to 16th, 17th century. And it's not the alone work. He himself mentions other works. And then Shad Bhasha, like I said, there are multiple other varieties of that studied, cultivated. In Karnataka, uh, uh, Chalukya Raj Someshwara Deva, he wrote an encyclopedic work, unique work of collection of knowledge called Manasol In Manasol it's a description of everything and more. There he quotes specific language, Prakrita language, specifically in context of music. Okay, and that language, he if you read the kind of language, it is not like typical Maharashtri Prakrit. It's very North Indian Prakrit. Okay, I as an Awadhi mother tongue person can actually understand it without having to translate it first into Sanskritam.
Wonderful.
So many other things, but I again, as with every other answer, I went too far away from Urdu. I was just saying that Urdu is different language. Please don't say this is Urdu, because that, if you say that this is Urdu, you are refusing to recognize what Hindi or momentum of Hindi coming all the way down through Apabhramsha and that coming down from Samskrita really is. Okay. Now, why is it popular? Why do we hear that? You know that answer as well as I do. So, so this Bollywood and this media, it just so happened that it's in their control. So I had taken a kind of, I was just doing some research that from 1948 onwards, all the lyricists, the most famous lyricists who composed together collectively, maybe 95% of all songs in the Bollywood films, listen to their names. They're all, you just listen to their names. Jan Nisar Akhtar, that is dad of our Akhtar Sahab.
Yeah.
Kaif Bhopali, Kaifi Azmi, father-in-law of Akhtar Sahab. Shakil Badayuni,
Ji.
Hassan Jaipuri,
Ji. Hasrat Jaipuri.
Ji. Zaidi, Sahir Ludhianvi, Mazaz Lakhnavi, Majruh Sultanpuri, Rahat Indori, Mehndi Raza. Now I'm not marking them out because they are Muslims. First of all, I'm saying they are official, full-time, dedicated Urdu poets.
Yes.
Their larger body of work
is
Urdu, and they are good Urdu poets. Okay, it's not a judgment. They're very good Urdu poets, but they are Urdu poets. And then let me, since I mentioned Muslims, I don't want to, just mention Muslims. Look at the Hindus and what they were doing. Okay, Rajendra Krishna Duggal, okay, Rajendra Kishan, okay, born in Lahore. Okay? So even the Hindus, okay, that contributed, okay. Shailendra, again, he is born in what is today Pakistan. Our Gulzar Sahab, okay, Gulzar, whose name is Sampuran Singh Kalra, again Pakistan born. Or I shouldn't say Pakistan born, but from the geography that is now Pakistan. I think point I'm trying to perhaps make, without success maybe, is that the sanskar of this bhasha we hear is of a particular niche. That niche is Urdu. That is very limited, extremely limited. You can still say in that bhasha purusha it is somewhere, but it's not the main body of that bhasha purusha. Okay?
Understood.
So that I think we need to cleanse our bhasha. We should again bring back that language which can be sugrahya, again deep south even. And just like a necklace, right? Necklace with pearls, moti. Okay. By the way, moti I heard from a friend is from Tamil, Muttu. Okay, so this in
Ah,
Sanskrit and Hindi came from Tamil Nadu, and
uh-huh.
in fact Rajashekhar, as I was saying, that
Yeah.
poet living in Madhya Pradesh, in Chandel area, in his imagery it is all South India. He talks about moti, so I'm again digressed. He talks in detail about how moti or pearl is cultivated, how deep south around Ramasetu and Setu Samudram area, moti is cultivated. Anyway, just like a necklace of pearls, there is a thread that connects those pearls.
Yeah.
That thread can only be Sanskrit bhasha, nothing
Yes.
else. If you
Yes.
break that and replace it with something else, that necklace gets broken. Then these pearls, they would get scattered. Okay, these
Understood.
pearls meaning our Indic languages. That's what
Understood.
Sanskrit is.
Thank you so much, Sarveshi, about that. I also wanted, I mean, you brought it out very well that there's a disproportionate contribution of Urdu lyricists or lyricists who were actually Urdu poets. And I also believe that there is this forcible foisting of Urdu on Muslims of India, as if to say that, whenever they depict Muslim society, Muslim characters, antagonists, protagonists, anything, if the milieu is Muslim or Islamic, I don't know why Bollywood, TV people, and otherwise they are trying to foist Urdu onto them. They have to speak a certain way, which is kind of crazy. As you rightly said, that it's hardly it's less than 300 years old. So it wasn't, and Islam in India has been here for many centuries. So it wasn't as if so this cultural alienation that is being brought about, you very well highlighted, it is not correct. And therefore, I believe we have actually a reason to cleanse the language. Urdu can be Urdu separate, but let's not allow people to run away with it and, corrupt Hindi and claim that what they call Hindi is actually Hindi. Which brings us towards the end, because we have to also take the audience questions. My last question, and I would request you to keep the answer short so that we can take audience Q&A, is what is the way forward? What can we do as Indians who are just citizens, but now we are living in times which are better connected? So how do you suggest we could go forward?
Dimpleji, I think there are so many things to perhaps see in that go forward approach. But some of the essential things are, first of all, to understand that unlike the monolithic approach that lingua franca is one single register, some say that should be Sanskrit, some say that should be Hindi, some say it should be something else. We should start to cultivate multilingualism among ourselves.
Yes.
That has been, and again, not, see, scholars would always be polyglots. I'm not talking about scholarly multilingualism. I'm
Common
talking about
people.
common people,
Yes.
ordinary person. So I think we should stop opposing this at the education level, this multilingualism. Okay. Now, at the same time, at the same token, I want to request North Indians to also, when they live in South India, for example,
To pick
they
up the
should pick
local
up the
language.
local language. I mean,
Absolutely.
more languages you pick up, more cultured, more, even your thought process, your overall methodology of thinking improves.
Yes.
And like you were saying, you used the nice word, Mausi Bhasha, right? So if your mother tongue be Awadhi, Braja, whatever,
Kashmiri.
Kashmiri, you are living in Andhra or Karnataka, pick up the local language as well. So
Indeed.
that would be second thing. Third, I think we talked about it in context of Urdu. If you like Urdu, please pick up Urdu, learn Urdu, even learn the script. But then when you speak Hindi, please speak Shuddha Hindi, which is of its own milieu, its own culture. Okay, Urdu and Hindi, please let's not mix it. That's third. Fourth, Hindi education, and I think some state governments have done a good job. We should recognize it. Hindi without Sanskrit is like headless chicken. Okay, so Hindi education must essentially have Sanskrit Bhasha education in it. So Uttar Pradesh was the first state that made Sanskrit a mandatory subject in its board up to 12th standard. Now, at policy level, at implementation, it was botched up just like many other things. But still, even today, there is a mandatory Anivarya Sanskritam, they call it.
Hmm.
Anybody who does high school or intermediate in Uttar Pradesh has to study Sanskrit.
Understood.
Sanskrit should be mandatory, absolutely yes. That necklace and thread,
The
right?
thread, the link.
Absolutely. Sanskrit must be mandatory. Hindi and Sanskrit should go hand in hand and together. That's how Kalidas said, right?
Yes.
Sanskar putena sukh grahen. Should be
Ji.
together. Next thing I would say technology, right? Even before technology, I think more important than that, our children. Okay, I feel very sad. Okay, I I the other day I was invited to a friend's place, for some occasion, and the children, these were Telugu and Tamil families. They were talking in English to even each other, okay, even to the parents. I think that should change. I think at home, amongst ourselves, we should try to cultivate our mother tongue. I mean, let the mother tongue not become a foreign language like English and a very poor language like English. Okay, let mother tongue be the mother tongue. Okay, so
Indeed.
that's perhaps a very important thing. Lastly, the translations and technology. So
Yes.
translations, there was a time, Dimple ji, आप को स्मरण होगा, पत्रिकाएं जो आती थी उत्तर भारत में, हिंदी
जी.
पत्रिकाएं तो बंद हो गई आनी. जो
जी.
पत्रिकाएं आती थी, उन पत्रिकाओं में मैंने, फॉर एग्जांपल, मास्ती कन्नड़ भाषा के महान दिग्गज साहित्यकार हैं, उनकी अनेक कथाएं हिंदी अनुवाद में मैंने पढ़ी हैं, अनेक. इसी प्रकार से भिन्न भिन्न लेखक, मराठी के, बांग्ला भाषा के, आंध्र के, उनके अनुवाद हिंदी में प्रकाशित होते रहे. प्रत्येक अंक में
जी.
कुछ न कुछ किंचित होते ही थे. This cross lingual cultural
जी.
exchange is extremely important. And please, I was reading Avarana, translated into English by a very worthy Sandeep, right? Any of these great novels, great artifacts of literature in any Indian language must be available in all other Indian languages. We should create
Yes.
that kind of culture. And you
Understood.
mentioned that I was trying to it is my aspiration. I'm working on a couple of translation projects to translate from other languages into Hindi, and let's see where those kind of things go. But I would encourage all of us, from whatever language we speak, to pick up the pen, spend some time, invest some time in doing translations. And lastly, technology is our friend, and I think the several usage of technology, using which we can bridge the gap between languages, including teaching languages. So I fully support the North Indians who live, for example, in Bangalore, must learn Kannada. So let's create technology for making that learning easy. Let's create the ecosystem and infrastructure for making that happen. Those were some stray thoughts, I think, Dimple ji, to answer your question. Hello, Dimple ji. Hello,
So,
Dimple ji.
a connectivity issue. Nevertheless, we have now just enough time to take few questions. I was going through the questions that have been posted. I believe Anirudh ji and Abhishek ji's questions have already been addressed during the course of our long conversation. Therefore, we have time only for two questions. One is from Shri Devi Sridharan ji and another from Sumedha Verma Oja ji. Sumedha ji has said that, if she were to write the question, there would be spelling issues and also probably she will speak out her question. D.V. Sridharan ji has appreciated you. You're an amazing man, he says. And he believes that Malayalam is an easy language for a North Indian to pick up. He also wants to understand how difficult or easy was Tamil for you. You have to keep the answer very short because Sumedha ji's question has also to be answered.
Okay, my short answer is I don't think it was difficult at all. There is no difficult language, quite honestly. Okay, all
Yes.
languages are equally easy or equally difficult. All you need is, environment to teach you that and willpower to learn that. So it was not difficult for me. In fact, I would say one thing in the hindsight, that if we can standardize the scripts, okay, again, that's a very touchy subject. I understand why it is emotionally touchy, but to me, lipi or the script is least important when it is about languages. In fact, if we can standardize um, script and pick your script, I'm not just saying that Devanagari just happens to be the most common script today and for centuries.
Common.
But if we had one script, I would have learned more easily. Tamil, first I needed to obviously learn to speak, but then once I learned the script, and once I was able to read magazines and newspapers, etc., it really accelerated the learning. Telugu Bhasha, on the other hand, I cannot read. Okay, I was lazy. I didn't put the effort, to be honest. So if I'm thinking, if I knew the script, I could maybe be more efficient in Telugu Bhasha as well. So I hope that answers. And thank you, Sridharanji.
Yes. So, Sumedha ji, I'm unmuting you. Please ask your question directly. Sumedha ji, are you there? Hello, Sumedha ji, are you there?
Me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Sarvesh ji, can you
Yes,
hear me?
Sumedha ji, we can.
Okay. So thank you for a wonderful exposition, Sarvesh ji. I have two questions. The first is just, could you give me a reference to that Bhasha Purush of Rajshekhar? Is it from his Kavya Mimamsa? Because I feel that it should be our anthem today. For this country's linguistic diversity, that should be our anthem. So I would really like it if you could just give me the reference so that I could get the
Absolutely,
exact
Sumedha
flow.
ji. It is from Kavya Mimamsa, and I will give you the exact reference. Maybe I will publish a blog. Okay.
Or maybe on your Twitter timeline, I'll take
I
it
will
from
do
there.
that.
Thank you.
I will do that.
My
Thank you,
other
Sumedha ji.
question is that I have been very interesting research till you went back till about the 5th century. I'm a historian of ancient India. I like to go back, a couple of millenniums before that. So when during the Mahajanpad period, you had the 4 different Prakrits, and we have a series of research articles done and by many people linking Hindi to Udicha and to the Shahbaz Gadi and the Mansena inscriptions and to the Kalsi dialect. So do you have any research on that? Do you have any inputs on that? I would be very happy to learn something new about this.
Ji. So I would briefly mention a couple of things. I am aware of those researches, Sumedha ji, that this Hindi Bhasha, because there are some unique aspects of linguistic aspects, grammatical aspects, phonological aspects of Hindi Bhasha, which are not found in Prakrits or the popular Prakrits. It is true. So scholars try to find some specific origin of this bhasha. One thing is for sure consensus that the origin of this language is not northern, it is western and specifically northwestern. That much is for sure. And other thing which more and more nowadays people are saying, not to digress, but still, is that this Maharashtri Prakrit is not exactly Proto-Marathi. So they think that this Maharashtri, while spoken in the region of Maharashtra, so Satvahan, for example, attests that the whole literature there attests to its spread. But this Maharashtri was far more widespread. and kind of the center of gravity of Prakrit was Maharashtri, not because it is from Maharashtra, but all India. Likewise, this Apabhramsha, which we call Hindi, or the proto version of that, is also from one of the Apabhramshas, which was northwestern of extraction. So Shaur Seni mixing with the.
And there was also, of course, the influence of Eastern Prakrit on it. If you have any references or any articles on this, and if you could post them, I would be very grateful.
I will try to.
And thank you for a really wonderful exposition. It was fascinating to us. I don't know how it went.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sumedha ji. Sarvesh ji, I thank you for your time and patience and energy. This has been a fabulous conversation for me personally, and I'm sure that all the other participants would agree with me. I would also like to thank all the participants for taking out so much time and making it an enriching discussion. I sincerely hope that this is first of many such talks that we have on languages with linguists, including yourself. And thank you so much, Indic Academy, and everyone who helped us in making this event a success, or so we would like to believe. See you soon in the next edition of Indic Chat. Happy Dhanteras and happy advance. Namaste.
Om Swasti.